This is a wild weekend with Iran and the war ongoing, and everyone is of course bracing for impact for tomorrow, for Monday, when the markets open and no one knows what's happening. Well, that's why we have Pioneer Alpha in this channel, because you know that I am observing geopolitics always very closely, and so far was mostly right about Greenland. About the election, by the way, I predicted Trump winning the election, if you remember that, with 312 electoral votes. Don't forget that, my best moment, of course. But I was spot on with Greenland. I was pretty much spot on with the last Iran intervention. The one thing where I was wrong was with Ukraine. I predicted Trump is going to end this Ukraine war within 6 months. But he didn't. In my defense, Trump was also wrong. He actually believed he could end this. This was a much more tricky situation. I hope this is coming to an end soon. We have some indications. But back to the present situation in Iran. First of all, there are some people in the comments, I have to say, that are a little emotional. Guys, it is very important when it comes to these things. We are not doing this here for fun. We are trying to be right about the future. And the most important thing when you want to be right about the future is you have to be level-headed, low cortisol, low stress, low freak out. If you think you belong to any of these desert tribes down there or are attached to them, and so you become very emotional because you think the world is ending and people are murdering you or the people you care for, that might be all the case, but you need to get it out of your system. That's very important. So we want to look at it rationally. What's going on here? That is why we are doing this, so we can be correct and right about these predictions. Now, the situation is the following. I said in my video yesterday that I think this will come to an end very quickly and is effectively a negotiation tactic of Trump. Some people freaked out about it. It's like, Joe, what are you talking about? They killed the leadership. So it's a very good negotiation tactic. I'm not saying it's a bad one. I said it's a negotiation tactic. And the essence of a negotiation tactic, as opposed to not a negotiation tactic, is the only reason you're doing all of that is to get a deal done. What is a different angle? What is a different strategy? George W. Bush, he didn't want to negotiate with Saddam. He wanted to get rid of him. Okay, these are very different objectives. Now, what you're doing on the surface, maybe you go to war, right? And that's what's happening. Maybe you knock out the leadership. That doesn't matter. The question, whether it's a tactic or not, is why are you doing it and when would you end it? So here are the indications I mentioned in the beginning, like yesterday, and that are now being actually confirmed that I was right about that. A lot of people still think I'm not right, so that's very entertaining, because if I'm right, you will look wrong. Here is why I think Trump was always planning to get this over with very quickly and get back to the negotiation table, and that he plans to end this entire thing next week. I'm very sure about that. It doesn't mean he can end it. There is a certain tail risk, but it would be very bad for Trump if he can not end it. So number one, we have to understand that Trump cannot afford an escalation of the war. So let's think this through before we go into these CNBC updates. Let's just think through a little bit how this works. Trump has a whole series of interests he has to cater to. He has, of course, Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, who wants regime change, who I don't know what leverage they have over Trump and why they can make him do all these things. But we all know Israel has a huge influence on the government. It doesn't control the US government, but it has a huge influence for whatever reason. And a lot of people complain about it. I'm just telling you what it is. It's de facto true. I think no one contests that. So the Israelis view Iran as a huge problem and they want to get rid of it. They want to have a regime change. And for some reason, Trump buys into that. Trump himself also believes he needs to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Even Tucker says this is Trump's personal goal. So that's a personal thing. There are then, in addition to that, some lobbies, the Hawks, the Lockheed Martin crowd, the oil crowd, all of them want war. It benefits them in different ways. So that's the war crowd, Israel and the lobbies, the different lobbies. But then you have, of course, the counterbalance to that, which is the MAGA base, or a very loud-voiced part of the MAGA base led by Tucker Carlson and a bunch of others. Maybe even Nick Fuentes, like on the America First side. These people are very important because they represent a huge share, probably a clear majority of the MAGA crowd. Not the entire MAGA crowd, but Trump's base, a huge chunk. He cannot ignore them, and they would be very, very mad if this escalates. Mad to an extent that would crush him at the midterms, potentially even in 2028. So my judgment is Trump under no circumstances can afford an escalation of this war. What does it mean, escalation? It means ground troops. It means losing American lives at scale. We heard so far 3 American servicemen have lost their lives. Of course, it's very tragic. 3 is still in the realm of what's digestible to the American public and even to the MAGA base. But when it gets into the hundreds, I think we have a major problem. Same is true for fiscal and financial expenses. This war needs to be super contained. So Trump is absolutely aware of this situation. He knows under no circumstances can he afford to escalate this. What means escalation? How would that work? I posted on X that when you look at this whole thing from a return on invest perspective, a political, financial power return on invest perspective, we are now in the Goldilocks moment. We are at a local maximum. Trump has achieved as much as you could possibly achieve with a first strike like that. He was hugely successful. He has knocked out the supreme leader and 30 other leaders. It's an enormous success, very little losses on the American side. So he's at the peak of winning right now. And that's when you want to end the whole situation. Because what is the next step? Now the Iranians can dig in. What are you going to do next? What if they hunker down and say, you know what, we are going to war? What is the United States going to do? We know from the past you can't bomb your way to victory. You need to move in at some point. You can bomb them all day long. It doesn't change anything. They can dig in. Nothing changes, right? So to have true regime change, you can't make any progress this way. You need to take it to the next level. And that next level would be a disaster for the United States. Of course, for Iran too, but it's not about that. So in a way, from a very rational perspective, Trump is now a little bit stuck unless he is playing poker. Of course, for the Iranians, the risk is even higher. And so I think it's very clear. That is what I mean with negotiation tactic. They are now ready to negotiate again. And when you read the latest updates here, there are clear indications that I'm correct with that call. I was correct yesterday. I'm even more correct today. Here, of course, it starts with Trump saying they're also destroying Iranian ships. Why is it so important? Because they want to control the sea. They want to control the Strait of Hormuz. They want to control the oil shipments. That is another big risk and choke point from an Iranian perspective, where they can get some more weight into the negotiations by saying we are blowing up the whole oil price, which would be very bad for everyone. So Trump is doing his best to knock out the naval bases, naval headquarters, and the ships, of course. And of course, they can do that now that the air space is under control. But more importantly, let's skip all the feckless Europeans. I'm not going to comment on them. They're, long story short, Merz and all these people, von der Leyen, of course, play absolutely no role. They are not in the loop. And they're complaining a little bit and no one even cares. So forget about the Europeans. But look at that. I told you so. And now the Atlantic is also telling you so. And of course, the usual suspects in the comments will say, Joe, you're so stupid. You believe the foreign minister. Now you're believing even worse, the Atlantic. I'm not believing anyone. I'm just triangulating what's possibly true. And I assume that is actually true, even though the Atlantic says it. Trump will speak with Iranian leadership one day after launching a strike on the country that killed its leader. They want to talk, and I've agreed to talk, so I'll be talking to them, Trump told the Atlantic on Sunday. If you have derangement syndrome, you might think Atlantic is lying. No, I don't think so. The odds are low that the Atlantic is lying. I think Trump actually said that. Trump says, they want to talk. I've agreed to talk. I'll be talking to them. What does it tell us? It tells us that Trump keeps open the communication lines. He actually absolutely wants them to talk without him looking weak, of course. He's saying they have to talk because he wants to end it. The US-Israeli joint assault on Iran comes after Washington and Tehran were engaged in talks for a new nuclear agreement. Trump lamented to the Atlantic that Iran did not speak to him earlier. They should have done it sooner. They should have given what was very practical and easy to do sooner. They waited too long, Trump said. Who told you this is a negotiation tactic? Trump is clearly telling us here, they should have done it sooner. They waited too long. Now I had to bomb them. But now they're talking again. Do you understand now what I mean with negotiation tactic? Hear it from Trump himself. Trump declined to specify to the magazine when he would be speaking to Iranian representatives. However, he noted that many involved in the previous talks have since been killed, unfortunately. Most of these people are gone. Some of the people we were dealing with are gone because there was a big hit. You understand how negotiations work? You can ramp up the levels of pressure on the other side. What is the ultimate pressure on the other side? You're sitting at a table, you're discussing something, you say, I do not want you to have a nuclear bomb. I don't want you to do certain things. And they say, Mr. President, but you have to understand, blah, blah, blah. We still want to have this and that. And then the Trump people say, you know what, that's really annoying. How do you gain more leverage? Well, you kill half of them. What will the other half then think? They think, oh, this is a tough negotiation because half of the people at the table are dead. I know I sound maybe a little cynical. These are just the facts. And when you know anything about human psychology, in a negotiation, when the people to the left and right of you are getting murdered by the other side, you become a little more wavery. You say like, ooh, maybe I should give them what they want. That's just how it works, okay? So I would argue, without looking like someone who has no feelings, but I would argue this is actually very effective if you want to achieve that. Of course, it's about a high stakes thing. We shouldn't have too much empathy with the Iranians. They're planning to create a nuke and incinerate everyone. So these are not nice people. That is what's happening here. Iran has since launched a counterattack on the US. By the way, when you remember last year June, look at Tel Aviv, Jerusalem and all these places. It looked very scary. Have you seen anything today about that? I haven't seen anything. I'm not saying there is no attack on Jerusalem, but it seems much more subdued than last time. That could mean, number one, the Iranian missile, attack infrastructure is more broken, but it can also mean that Iran is actually holding back. And I can guarantee you Iran is holding back. And why do they do that? Because they can't afford an escalation, even less than Trump can. So again, exactly like last year, both sides want to absolutely prevent an escalation. If you remember, Iran did everything they could to not escalate last time. And maybe now you think I'm crazy. Oh, they shot at stuff at Tel Aviv. Well, they could have done much, much more. But they knew they needed an off-ramp. Now they know it even more. And now the Damocles sword or the Trump sword is hanging over them. They don't know who's next. So some people in the comments said, like, what do you mean, Joe? You're stupid. This is not a negotiation. He just escalated and murdered them all. To repeat that, what is a negotiation tactic? It can be anything. Anything can be a negotiation tactic. It's not about the means. It's about the end. The end of a negotiation tactic is negotiation. As opposed to total war, a war of annihilation, a war of conquest. This is not about negotiation. Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, these were setups in the war where there was no negotiation, right? Regime change, moving troops in and changing the whole country and domination building was the objective. There was nothing to negotiate. And that is exactly what led the United States into giant disasters. And that is exactly what Trump cannot afford under any circumstances, even if Israel wants it potentially. And so that is very important to differentiate here. And by understanding the true intent of Trump, he started it Friday night so he can end it ideally by Monday. We have a reasonable shot. I think we need to get prepared, of course, that it's not ending by Monday because you cannot predict the other side. They might be in disarray. They might not be able to communicate, so it could last longer than Monday. But it's clear that Trump intends to end this quickly. Go back to the negotiation table and now with much more leverage say, look, you lost all your ships, you lost even more, and half of you are dead. We can do this all over again, then the next half is going to be dead. I think it's very effective, it makes sense, but we have to understand the constraints Trump is under. He cannot afford escalation. By the way, there are more lobbies. It's not just Israel, the weapons and the oil industry and the war hawks on one side, and on the other side, America First and most of MAGA and the Tucker crowd. You also have the Wall Street crowd. And the Wall Street crowd has a huge influence on Trump, same as the Silicon Valley crowd. Neither Wall Street nor Silicon Valley wants an escalation. They want this to be over. They have no appetite for it. So I would say it's balanced or even skewing towards the non-aggressor guys, Wall Street and most of MAGA and America First, who absolutely don't want that. So Trump, by doing the decapitation strike we saw, can, have his cake and eat it too. But only if he ends it now. So I think that's my take. It's not a guarantee of what happens with this kind of war situation. Things can always escalate or get out of control. But the intent from the Trump administration, I think, is crystal clear at this point. They want to end it, of course, on their terms. I think they achieved a tremendous victory, by the way. No one expected that they succeeded with that. One little story on the side. I'm in Northern Europe right now. I'm surrounded by people who hate Trump, actually. They don't know too much about him, but they hate him. I've heard from multiple people that this was the only good thing Trump ever did. In other words, surprisingly, I think Trump scored with, you know whom, the Karen crowd, the Europeans, because a lot of them despise the Ayatollah. So interesting dynamics. I think it was an enormous win for Trump. Now it's time to bring the win home. In my opinion, I'm not giving advice to Trump. He's not listening to me anyway. I'm not voicing my opinions here, what should happen. I'm voicing my take on what will most likely happen. So what does it mean for us on the stock market? Well, by the way, we see the latest here on the stock market. Oil is actually pretty much under control. We will see what happens. Prediction markets right now say it's 75%. It goes over $73 per barrel, but that's very minor. No one cares, right? It was at 67. So that would be roughly what? 10% up maybe. That would be very minute. And that basically says, if that's true, we have to see tonight what the futures do. But oil is the central indicator here, how serious the markets think this is. If oil goes up 10%, it's completely unserious. If it would be serious, a serious escalation, oil could go up a lot. So that is the best indicator to see what the markets actually price in. What is also very interesting to see, by the way, is crypto. The crypto market is sometimes very smart. And when you observe what crypto did, I observed this very closely. I'm just going to share this with you guys. Ether and Bitcoin. It's actually very surprising what happened. Let's see. Because when this all started to happen, we saw a giant drop. We saw a giant drop and then a very rapid recovery. Look at this. Oops, what is this? Look at this. This is exactly when it happened. Giant drop, right? That's Ether from 1920, all the way down here to 1,857. That's non-trivial, right? That's 100, not really 100 points, but it's like 80 points or something. And then it recovered all the way up, which is, I think, an interesting sign that the crypto markets, who are very risk-on assets, so crypto would definitely lose if they would think they are very correlated with the NASDAQ, very potentially a predictor of what's going to happen with the NASDAQ tomorrow. They first dropped hard and then recovered immediately. Look at this. You see this? Bitcoin, here is the drop. Bitcoin dropped from 65, what was that here? 65,000 pretty brutally to 63,000 and now is actually all the way back up exactly from where it started Friday night when this whole thing happened. So I'm observing crypto very closely right now, and crypto often is an indicator or like runs, a little front runs tech right now, the technology market. Very interesting that they don't take it too seriously, the whole situation. Maybe they're watching Joe's channel. Who knows? So I would definitely expect, depending on what we see tonight, unless there is already a negotiation announced before the market opens tomorrow. But if not, and this is just ongoing, of course, we have to expect like some red, like 2% down or something. NASDAQ, that would mean Tesla 4% down and the usual stuff. But even if right now, at the current situation, I would boldly bet on this whole thing being over before Friday, in case you're playing options. But of course, we have to monitor the situation. There is always tail risk. This is not completely controllable by Trump, but Trump's intent is to end this very quickly. It's very clear from what he said. So that's why you're watching this channel. We're trying to do a little macro and predict this stuff accurately. So far, I was right. Let's see what happens if we get new data points. But I think the situation on the chess and battlefield are very clear. Trump does not want to escalate. Iran would make an enormous mistake that cost them their own lives if they would escalate. So unless they lose control internally in Iran and something happens, that is the thing we cannot predict. This should be over very soon. Let's see what happens. I hope you enjoyed that. For the irrational people who are watching, please don't do stupid comments, only nice comments. And if you have criticism, you can be critical of me, of course, but don't be like a little girl. That's very bad. So I hope that was interesting. See you tomorrow.